Hello, my wonderful, beautiful friends, guys. Welcome back to our /entitled people, where people believe they own other people's land because they say they do. And in this episode, it's all about horrible neighbors, and a Karen couple tries to steal a part of OP's backyard. And guys, it backfires so hard. I hope you enjoy the stories today. Don't shake your heads too hard. And as always, you can send or link your post to this email right here. Let's dive in. So my neighbor went 100% environmentally friendly before Christmas, and he also has gone completely vegan, which is good for him, I don't care. However, since going vegan and environmentally friendly, he's constantly complaining how I'm living, and I'm starting to get really annoyed. The guy will moan and groan when my fireplace is on, he moans when he can smell meat cooking, and he complains when my lights have been on too long. It's none of his business. With that said, my parents recently came down for dinner, and the neighbor was complaining about the smell of roast, and that the kitchen light was on during the daytime, and my father told him where to shove it. During most of the year, my neighbor's also been ringing my doorbells, complaining about my lights being on, and how I should use candles, and how I should not eat meat. I basically tell him to F off now and just shut the door in his face. I don't even answer the door to him now. Yesterday, he was going through my garbage bin, moaning how I should be recycling. Now I do and don't recycle. I recycle glass and cardboard. He also complained about all the meat packages he found in my garbage, and again, told me that I should not eat meat. This whole thing's getting absolutely ridiculous now. I came home today with a bucket of KFC, and as soon as I pull it out of the car, he comes over acting as if I've just murdered innocent people. He was moaning, pointing at my KFC, saying that was a living animal. It probably had a family. I just got mad and said, that's why I got the family bucket, so no one was left behind. Honestly, in my opinion, this is the worst kind of neighbor, guys. Like, the ones that don't mind their own business and complain about other people just living their lives. Like, as soon as he complained about what was in OP's garbage, I was like, yeah, this guy's way over the top. And if I were OP, I'd be bringing buckets of KFC home all the time after that. And this person says, my neighbors can do what they want. But as soon as they start trying to force their lifestyle on me, I would be rebelling so hard. If you don't want me to cook meat, I'm going full carnivore. If you're going through my garbage, you're not gonna like what you find. I absolutely love this, guys. The pettier, the better, right? Guys, let me know how you would deal with a neighbor like this. I was visiting my friend at his dad's house, in an area where the land is so steep, all the driveways have to switch back up from the main road to the houses. A straight driveway is not an option because it would be steeper than the building code allows. A few doors down the road lived a nice old couple who recently had a vacant lot next door to them, but the lot had sold and the new owner started construction on a new house. Unfortunately, the lot was so steep that the new owner built his driveway partly on the old couple's land. It was carved out of the hillside with an excavator. Now, this probably wouldn't have been a big deal if the new owner approached the couple first and asked nicely, but he didn't, and I wouldn't be telling this story if he had. In fact, the old couple had no idea this was happening until they came home one day and they see a huge scar in the hillside, snaking up from the road in front of their house, across the corner of their property, and winding upwards to where an excavator was working to prepare the land for the new neighbor's house. They were pretty upset, but being nice, reasonable people, they figured it was an honest mistake, so they went over to talk to the machine operator. He didn't know anything useful, but he was happy to give them the phone number of the new property owner. The old guy gave him a call and politely explained the situation, saying that his contractors were digging on his land, but his new neighbor, whom he'd never even met, was having none of it. He flat out denied that the driveway crossed the property line, and he was rude enough that the old guy was pretty upset. At this point, the old couple weren't sure what to do. They double-checked the property lines to make sure they were right, and of course they were. But after further conversations with the new owner, it was clear he was an unreasonable guy who wasn't going to come to the negotiating table willingly. The old couple didn't want to take legal action because that would have been expensive, and frankly, the damage to their yard was already done. At the same time, they couldn't let someone walk all over them like that, especially if they were going to be living next door for the foreseeable future. So the situation stewed for a while, as construction continued on the new house, until one day when my friend's dad saw the old couple in the neighborhood, and they start chatting. Of course, they told him the story about the new entitled neighbor. Now, my friend's dad really likes the old couple, who don't have a mean bone in their bodies, so he was pretty pissed about the situation. And when he went home, he couldn't get it out of his head. So that evening, after a few beers, he had a brilliant idea. He called up the old couple, explained his plan, and then asked for their permission to carry it out. They just chuckled and gave him the go-ahead. So with that, he hopped into a rusty old full-size pickup he had and drove it over to the old couple's place, where he then parked it across the encroaching driveway, making sure it was entirely on the old folks' property. The next morning, the work crew arrived bright and early to find they couldn't drive to the house they were building because some jackass had parked a crappy old F-150 across the driveway. They then saw the note in the window with my friend's dad's phone number on it, so they called him to ask what the F. He explained that he had permission from the owners to park there and that no, he would not move his truck so they could get to work. Furthermore, if anyone attempted to tow the truck, they would be charged with trespassing and theft. There was no way the construction guys were going to haul their tools up the hill by hand, and they didn't want to get in the middle of a legal battle. So they just called the new owner to let him know that they would be taking the day off, and that they would continue to take days off until the property boundary dispute was resolved. A few hours after that, the new owner calls the old couple in a fury, but the old couple told them the same thing my friend's dad told the construction workers. Basically, the truck was parked on their property, so if he had a problem with that, he could go F himself. So, to make an already long story shorter, the new neighbor ranted for a while, but he eventually wanted his house to be built, so the nice old couple ends up with a significant sum of money in exchange for an easement, allowing the driveway to cut across the corner of their property. And my friend's dad got several thank you cases of beer, and the satisfaction that comes from putting an entitled a-hole in his place. The dad is definitely the hero in this one, guys, for helping the old couple out. But honestly, I don't know why they just didn't contact authorities or call someone about the violations. Like, I'm pretty sure if you had proof of property lines, they'd have to stop work immediately, right? And guys, I love the way this person thinks. They comment, "I probably would have waited for all the work to be finished before placing a fence across the driveway on my side of the property." So my husband and I bought a house next to the bullies of the neighborhood. This is a long story, but very satisfying, so please hang in there. First, some background. My husband and I bought our home on a 3/4 acre plot of land 9 years ago. At the time, we were a few months away from getting married, and this was an exciting moment for us. The day we took possession, we picked up the house key from our lawyer, and we went to the house. We got out of our car and just took a moment in the parking lot, holding hands to gaze on our first home together. At that point, this elderly man in his 70s comes running from his house next door to greet us. He'd apparently been waiting for us all day. The guy then breathlessly told us all the problems the previous owners had had with our house. And to be honest, it did ruin our moment. My husband tried to politely get him to go home, and he explained that we had a lot to do and needed to get the house ready for the moving van to arrive shortly. My husband unlocked the front door for us to go inside, and this man, who didn't take the hint, just pushes his way in. He was the first one to step foot into my new home. He then proceeds to inspect the entire first floor, making comments along the way like, "Oh look, they put hardwood in the living room, gross." He then went to climb the stairs, and at this point, our shock had started to wear off. So my husband stood on the first step and he blocked him from going upstairs. We finally got him out of the house. Now I'm telling you this for 2 reasons. First, I wanted to give you a sense of how off this man was. Second, during his non-stop verbal diatribe, he then pointed out that the green chain link fence between our properties was on my property, and we're responsible for any costs associated with its maintenance. He then vaguely pointed to the rear corner of our property, and he said the survey marker back there showed this. He also said that the previous owners had dug up the buried front survey monument and they moved it, so it was no longer reliable. At the time, we thought this was an odd story, so we dismissed it, but we shouldn't have. So shortly after we moved in, despite a bad first encounter, we invited the neighbors, who I'll call Joe and Rose, to dinner. They were quite chatty. They told us horrible stories of all the neighbors on the block. Rose, then in her high-pitched voice, said these things to me. She said, number 1, I don't like the sound of music, so I shouldn't have to listen to it. The people in 37, 42, and 55 like to listen to music all the time, so I called police on them. Number 2, I also don't like the smell of fire, so I shouldn't have to smell it. The people in number 39, 41, and 53 like to have backyard fires all the time, so I call the fire department on them. Number 3, I see you have dogs. I don't like the sound of dogs barking, so I shouldn't have to listen to that. The people in 12, 25, and 64 all have dogs, so I called animal control on them. Same with children. I don't like the sound of children playing, so I shouldn't have to listen to that. The people in number 48 and 29 have kids who like to play road hockey. I'll have you know, I called Child Protective Services on them. And this was just a few examples of her stories. Nobody was spared. My husband and I were dismayed and decided to keep Joe and Rose at arm's length from that point on. We decided not to extend any further dinner invitations. So with that said, here's the source of the issue, the property line. Several years ago, we had our driveway repaved, and Joe approached our contractor to have his driveway repaved too. In addition to repaving his existing driveway, he also added a parking pad that butted up to our green chain link fence. Joe would regularly back his van on the parking pad right up against the fence. In May, Joe backed into the fence. He bent 2 fence posts and he split a section of the chain link fence. Now you would think that any nice neighbor would have come to our door, explained what happened, and apologized. But Joe is not nice. We discovered the problem when our 3 dogs escaped through the split in the fence into his yard. Later that day, we asked Joe to explain what happened. He denied everything while leaning against a rental car. We did get him to acknowledge that the damage must have come from his property, given the direction of the damage. But he claimed it must have been his snow removal guy who hit the fence months ago. There were no offers to compensate us for the damaged fence. My husband simply used wire to repair the fence to secure our yard, and we let it go, and that should have been that. Shortly afterwards, Rose starts asking when we're going to replace the fence. She explained that the repair on the fence that my husband did was way too ugly, and she shouldn't have to look at it. Initially, I thought she was joking. I pretended to not hear her and simply walked away. She then brought it up 2 more times. By the 3rd time, I told her very blatantly that we had no plans to replace the fence. In the spring, Rose again lamented about the ugly fence, but this time she offered to pay half the cost to replace it. I asked her if she was interested in another chain link fence or a wooden fence. She preferred a wooden fence, so I called some contractors to get quotes. On the day the first contractor was scheduled to come over, I called Rose. I wanted to sort out some details about the fence heights, etc. before the contractor came over. She then explained that Joe told her that because the fence was ours, that they should not and would not pay a penny towards replacing it. So that was that. I canceled the contractor, but I asked him out of curiosity how much it would cost to replace the fence with another chain link fence. Based on linear feet, the cost was around $2,000. Later that summer, Rose approached us again. My husband explained that the cost to put a chain link fence in was expensive, and we couldn't afford it, and that it wasn't our priority. Rose offered to pay half the cost of the chain link fence, and honestly, I just wanted to walk away, but also felt that we would never have an opportunity to share cost again, so we start negotiating. We wanted the fence to be 6 feet tall, and they wanted it to be 4 feet tall. We compromised on 5 feet. It would be a wooden fence, in the style of our newly constructed back fence. In addition, we talked about whether to place it on the property line or the existing fence line. Joe preferred the latter, so we agreed on the existing fence line. After all, according to the back property marker, our fence was only around a foot inside the property line, and Joe was having trouble avoiding the existing fence. If we moved it out 1 foot, chances are he would hit it again. We also wanted to put in 4 glass panels in the back portion of the fence, so we could continue to enjoy the view of the ravine past Joe's property that we'd been enjoying with the chain link fence. So with that, they reluctantly agreed, and they even moved the location of a new shed they were installing so it would not block our planned view through the glass. They agreed to pay us $1,000. We decided to bite the bullet and upgrade to a wooden fence. Now, I'm gonna make a long story short here. Rose hated the new fence, and she said it was so ugly. They then said they weren't going to pay what they'd agreed to, and further, they would no longer agree to allow us to install glass panels. They said that the ravine view belonged to them, and we had no right to it. Out of pettiness, they also planted a row of hedge cedars on their side of the fence, and a blue spruce tree to block our view. At this point, Rose starts a screaming campaign, which consists of, "The fence is ugly, we shouldn't have to look at this effing ugly fence. And you can't look over here, look away, we own the effing view." It got to the point that every time we went into our backyard, she screamed at us. We tried to bite our tongues, but it was hard. At one point, Rose was screaming at my husband while leaning on our unfinished new fence. He asked her to back up because she was standing on our property between the fence and the property line. At this point, she became enraged and she screamed that she owned the land on this side of the fence because of squatters' rights. So from that point on, she starts screaming all the usual things, plus squatter rights, squatter rights, squatter rights. We started to avoid going into our backyard if they were outside. One day, the fence contractor arrives to work on the fence. We saw him pull out front, and we went to the backyard to meet him through the side gate. Both Joe and Rose saw us, and they start screaming the usual complaints. In addition, Rose added some lies about the contractor, how he didn't know what he was doing, and he had built an ugly fence and was messy, and he left wood and tools on their property. At that point, my husband had had enough, and he finally snapped, telling Rose to shut up. He also called her a liar. Rose accused my husband of threatening her. At that point, the contractor and his wife, who were bringing their tools into the backyard, made their presence known, and Rose suddenly shut up because we had witnesses. At this point, I realized that Rose was trying to set us up so she could call the police. She wanted to accuse us of threatening her, and I found a lawyer. Our lawyer then explained 4 things to us. Number 1, that we had little claim to the verbal contract of $1,000, that we needed to let it go. And strategically, we were better off having full control over the fence and ensuring they had no interest in it at all. We could also build it as we wanted. We also didn't need their permission to add glass panels or paint it as we pleased. Number 2, they had no claim to adverse possession, aka squatter rights. Our properties were registered in land titles by the developer before the houses were built. And in our province, properties registered in land titles with a survey are not eligible for claims of adverse possession. She also explained that screaming that they own the land over the fence does not give them the land, that they must go to court to have the judge award the land to them. Number 3, screaming over the fence is a crime and we need to call the police. The police would calm down this escalating situation. And number 4, claiming to own the view of a public ravine was simply ridiculous. So we respond in 2 ways. Number 1, we sent the neighbors a letter explaining they did not own the land on their side of the fence and provided proof of the land registry and the relevant legal information. We explained that if they walked on our property, they were trespassing. We also explained that from that point on, we would have zero tolerance of any verbal abuse. Number 2, we called the police non-emergency line, and this was sad for me because I've never in my whole life called the police on anyone. When the police arrived, they spoke to us first. We explained that we wanted the neighbors to stop screaming at us, our family, or our contractors. The police wanted to know what kind of things they were screaming at us. We didn't have to do much explaining because as soon as Joe and Rose saw us standing outside, they opened the door and Rose became agitated and she starts screaming that they owned the view, etc. One police officer had to ask her to go inside the house and close the door. Joe remained on the front porch with the officers and he agreed to stop harassing us. While walking back to our house, the police explained to us that they felt there were some mental health issues going on with Rose, and if there were any more issues, we should call the police again. He suggested that we continue to document incidents, which is in line with what our lawyer advised us. Believe it or not, sending the police over did calm things down for a while. But in the meantime, I was worried that Joe would back into the new fence and act malicious. He would back his van right up against it. I wanted to install a barrier in the space between the fence and the property line that would prevent Joe from hitting the fence. But to do that, we really needed to know where the property line was. So we borrowed a metal detector and we found the buried front marker. It was not where we expected it to be. If it was correct, the front of our fence was around 6 to 7 feet inside the property line, not 1 foot like we thought. We marked the location of the buried property marker with a wooden stake and paint, and this upset Joe, and I saw him remove our stake with his riding mower the next day. Because the fence line did not align to the property line, we hired a surveyor. They discovered that not only had Joe removed the front stake we installed, but he had also removed the official buried survey marker with his mower, which is illegal. When Rose saw the surveyors, she comes running out and she verbally attacked them, saying they could not trespass on her property. The surveyors were very calm and they handed her their business card. They then explained that now they'd identified themselves and they were allowed to, by law, to access her property. Rose then placed a lawn chair on her front lawn, sat down, crossed her arms, and stared at the surveyors all day. I was shocked at how long the process took. At 5 p.m., the surveyors explained that they were not quite complete. Because our property was on a curve and was pie-shaped, they had some triangulation calculations they had to make at their office, and they would come back the following Monday to finish up. They also explained the process was taking them a while because not only had the front marker been removed, but the back marker had been moved over by 5 feet. Now that strange story that Joe had told us about the previous homeowners moving the buried monument made sense. Joe himself had moved the back monument, and the front monument was out of alignment, so he came up with this lame story to explain it. The surveyors came back the following Monday. and they installed the new front and back markers in the correct locations, and they added 10 additional wooden stakes all along the property line. Now things made sense. The original fence was around 6 feet inside the property line all along the fence line, and I'm thinking, oh my goodness. When Joe came out and he saw the new property line stakes, all hell broke loose. I thought he was going to have a stroke. By this time, I had told our fence contractors to stop work on the new fence and asked him what it would take to move the fence closer to the property line. And remember, he had heard Joe and Rose scream lies about his work and the ugly fence. There was no love lost between the contractor and our neighbors. He wanted to do everything he could to make things right. And if moving the fence is what needed to be done, so be it. So the day after the stakes were installed, he started to dig post holes 2 inches inside the property line. He laughed whenever Joe and Rose gave him a hard time and accused him of trespassing. We also bought a surveillance camera, and I was able to document the neighbors' bad behavior. They continued to park their van past the string line, and they were adding their own stakes at strange places. We just removed them. Around this time, we had drinks with another neighbor who's named Matt, from down the road. This was the only person that was still on speaking terms with Joe and Rose. Matt made it clear that he had his own issues with Rose, mainly because she called the fire department whenever he had a small backyard fire. Matt explained that Joe and Rose still believed they had claims to squatter rights, and they planned to hire a lawyer to claim this land. And if by some chance they failed, they planned to charge us thousands of dollars for the cost they'd incurred several years before to remove 5 large pine trees along the property line. They removed these trees as the roots were damaging their driveway. They felt that if we wanted to claim additional land, then we should incur the cost to remove these trees as they technically belong to us. According to an old aerial view I received from our surveyor, it looks like the pine trees were planted decades ago on the property line. I now suspect the chain link fence was simply installed in front of the mature pine trees. It's likely those pine trees wholly or partially belong to us. Either way, Joe and Rose had failed to secure our permission to remove them. Not only were we under no obligation to pay for the cost to remove them, but we had a perfect counterclaim if they tried. The best thing Matt told us was that Rose was so angry at the police for how she'd been told to go back inside the house that she called their sergeant to file a complaint against them. True to their word, the neighbors did hire a lawyer. The whole neighborhood saw him arrive in his suit and briefcase. He must have told them that they had no claim to adverse possession and they couldn't charge us for the cost of removing the trees because nothing happened. So the fence is now completed to within 2 inches of the property line. We did not install glass panels. This was a hot button for Rose as she threatened to break them. While holding a hammer, she said, "It would be a shame if they broke, wouldn't it?" Very generously, we also decided to not cut the asphalt on the corner of Joe's parking pad that's on our property. Instead, we bumped the fence at the parking pad by 2 feet, and we installed a wooden barrier in front of it so Joe can't hit the new fence. Rose still complains that the fence is ugly, but we don't care. An interesting thing did happen when we stood up to Joe and Rose. A collective cheer went up in the neighborhood. Several neighbors have offered support and told us their stories of abuse. We take comfort in the wins we made, including regaining almost 1,200 square feet of property. This has been a painful and sad chapter for us, but we're grateful for all of our other neighbors who are decent and kind. I just wanted to share this story to let others know that fences do make the best neighbors. Oh, I agree 100% with that, guys, especially with nightmare neighbors like that. Like, I really don't know why people choose to be a-holes to the people they live right next to. I just hope Opie had a huge backyard barbecue and he invited all the neighbors after that because, wow, was that ever a soap opera. And that, my friends, brings us to another end of our / entitled people. Guys, I hope you enjoyed today's stories. If you did, hit that thumbs up, and if you're not subscribed, consider subscribing so you don't miss these crazy stories. And if you missed the last episode on the channel, it's in our / entitled people episode, where Opie's Karen neighbor abducts her cat and she calls 911 when it attacks her. Guys, it's such a crazy story, so go check it out if you haven't. And myself and Stevie Boy will see you guys in the next one. We love you.